Back before Google, LinkedIn, and cell phones, I stumbled on recruiting. I always knew I wanted to create a recruiting firm that created an incredible candidate and client experience while allowing me, as well as my team, an opportunity to live an abundant life on our own terms, to have the freedom to work where, when, and how we want, and to be rewarded financially for a job well done. It has been a long, sometimes messy marathon, but wow, have I learned a lot about recruiting, branding, sales, scaling, leadership, overcoming challenges, and most importantly, overcoming myself. I absolutely love our industry, and this podcast is for you, my fellow recruiters ready to learn, grow, and push yourself to your next level. Let's do this together. We are talking about all things recruiting. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of All Things Recruiting. I am so excited to have Bizzie Gold on the podcast today. So thank you for coming, Bizzie, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm excited that we get to enjoy this amazing set together.
I know, me too, and in person. So today is a super exciting day for a couple reasons. One, because as I was just chatting with you about, we usually do the podcast virtually, and this is the first time where I get to have an in-person guest, and I'm really honored that I get to spend this next time with you.
I'm glad that it gets to be me.
Yes. And today, especially when I was driving here, I'm like, I am so excited for you because today on June 3rd, it's actually officially the launch day of your new book. Mm-hmm. Your Brain is a Filthy Liar. And I read that when I was, researching for today. And I thought that is like the most amazing title. It just immediately grabs you. And for me, when I heard that, I'm like, thank God, because and we'll get into this a lot, I know, over the hour about self-sabotaging beliefs and thoughts. And, we kind of get in these cycles that can just really rope us in. And I thought, personally, this is going to be such a good time because I know I'm definitely one of those people where I can hear my brain start to think things and get in these loops. So I'm like, this is amazing. I get to talk to you and find out more about your book and really give some tools not only to our audience, but we as recruiters, we talk to so many candidates and so many clients. And if this is happening to everyone, then there's some things that we can really do to impact how everything goes with our candidates and finding them great jobs. So
absolutely.
Let's dig in. First of all, give us a little background for those of you, the people, my listeners that don't know you, just a little bit of a background on your company, The Break Method.
I'm the founder of Break Method, and I've been in this field for 11 years. And it's an intersecting company where we do work in mental health, but we also work with corporations. So that's, I think, why we're here having this conversation about recruiting. But we're also a tech company. So we're at this kind of beautiful juxtaposition that while I started it 11 years ago was very radical and disruptive, now actually I think a lot of things are having this sort of meeting of different disciplines, especially revolving around technology. So this is something that I created back in 2014, and there's a methodology side of it. So there's a therapeutic intervention that is part of it, but there's also this brain pattern mapping technology that is part of it. And that's the diagnostic process and algorithm that I created. And that's also now used with corporations to both integrate into their recruiting pipeline. And then it's also used to actually scan the brain patterns of everyone within the organization so that we can understand why certain team dynamics are falling apart or why a company area was meeting certain goals and then all of a sudden they started to slide off. We're able to figure out why that's happening at the level of brain pattern. I've worked in a variety of settings, including clinical settings. I've worked in residential therapeutic programs. I've taught this work in the prison system. And then I've also had the honor to work with a ton of private clientele that are some of the top 1% CEOs and entrepreneurs in the world. So I've had exposure to so many different age groups and different backgrounds, both, kind of the very financially driven entrepreneur types and then, people that are just fresh out of prison or currently living in domestic violence shelters. So I work with everybody, and I just have a heart for humanity. And there have been so many times throughout my career, people, you come in and they're like, you need to charge more money for this. And I'm like, I really don't. I'm here to help humankind heal and unwind some of the paradigms we've been operating in that have been keeping us stuck. And to do that, I don't think you can do that with integrity and be charging tens of thousands of dollars. I feel like that's something that people do when they want to kind of elevate themselves as an expert and a coach. And I just have a heart for solving the problem and bringing that to the masses. And to bring it to the masses, got to keep it affordable.
Yeah. So tell me, because I started to read in your book that the first step, like if someone was going to get involved with the break method, what's the first step? Would it
Typically, first step is brain pattern mapping always. Yeah. So brain pattern mapping is the algorithm that I created over the last 11 years. And now anyone can take that diagnostic assessment. It takes about 20 minutes. You complete it online. And a lot of people will immediately be like, oh, well, is it like a quiz? It's nothing like a quiz. This is a very high level algorithm that took over a year of a 12-person team to build out. So it's far more extensive than that. We track a series of over 200 historical data points. One of the things that absolutely differentiates Break Method is we use data rather than narrative. So if anyone thinks about a time that perhaps they've been in therapy or they've done any sort of coaching, oftentimes you're asked questions that are very narrative based. Well, what was your relationship like with your mom? Right? That's not data. You know, did you have a good relationship with your sister? As soon as you're asking things like, did you have a good relationship? Well, what does good mean? How am I going to actually distill good into metrics that I can track? By contrast, everything that we do in Break is data-driven, metric-driven, and it's taking the experience that, you know, I could say I had a great childhood, right? Let's give that a big umbrella term. Instead of it being I had a great childhood, we're looking at very specific tangibles, and then we're starting to understand how those inputs that are more concrete or data-driven are actually shifting or altering the way a person perceives reality that would then make them more inclined to say this was good, right? Because it's all very subjective. I might see something as bad that you might perceive as good. Where does that leave you when you're trying to help a person solve their problems? You really have to go to that more concrete layer of data. So that is the layer that we work on with everything. And whether it's the book or starting with Break Method, I always suggest starting with brain pattern mapping.
I love that. So as far as the title, like why are our brains filthy liars?
Originally, I actually wanted to title the book You're a Liar, and I did a survey on this. And what was interesting is I surveyed everyone on my email list and my social media following, and I put either you're a liar in one camp, and then the other camp was the your brain is a filthy liar. What's interesting is when the survey came back, everyone that had actually done my work already, by far and away, voted for you're a liar. They were like, yes, that's it right there.
Yeah.
Everyone who had not yet done my work picked this one. And there's a reason for that. I think you're a liar feels so personal, where it almost feels like an attack. But when you've actually done this work, you realize that is actually the truth. But you're able to say yes to that because you've healed so much that it doesn't feel like a personal attack that makes you go into some sort of shame spiral. So I think for those who had not yet done my work, this feels enough separated where it's you are not a liar, but your brain is. So your brain is inside of you, sure, but it's not you. So it gives us just enough of that separation, I think, for people to take ownership and take a step closer to being open to understanding what's in the book. From a very young age, all of the inputs that we experience start to create formulas with which we see the world. And as you can imagine, if we're creating these formulas between the ages of 2 and 5, these formulas are probably fairly subjective and flawed. And yet they very much dictate how we perceive reality, even at the ages that we are currently. The way I like to describe this to people is that you wouldn't hand your 8-year-old the keys to your car, but you actually let the 8-year-old version of you run your life all day long. All of our autopilot, more emotionally driven decisions, our self-sabotage, our bad habits, they're all driven by an 8-year-old or younger version of us. So this is why many clients, they're not aware at the moment that they would need to be aware to stop it. They only become aware once they're in pain. So making it relevant to some of your clientele, maybe the job that they really wanted, that they thought they prepared for, that they crushed the interview, now they're heartbroken that they didn't get the job that they worked so hard to get. that's the pain point, right? I somehow this didn't work. We need to get people so many stages earlier than that in understanding how their brain is labeling reality and then constraining the choices that they perceive they have. Because for a client like what you might deal with, there might be something subtle that happened in the recruiting process that they're currently having a blind spot to. So now they're just experiencing the hurt, but they weren't aware at the moment that they would have needed to change something to change the outcome. I like to look at all behavior as a math formula. And sadly, I think we've been presented this idea that mental health is more of an art form or a phenomenon that we don't really understand. And I've always taken a very disruptive approach to this because it makes so much sense to me and has my whole life that I'm kind of in the camp that there must be some more conspiratorial element to this because it's so obvious that I find it hard to believe that for 200 years we would just pretend to not know these things. Mm-hmm. Like if it's this obvious to me, it's got to be this obvious to some people. And yet we've kind of presented this idea that mental health is this meandering path that we kind of loop around. It's a messy process. I mean, how many times have you been told that like healing's a messy process? Mm-hmm. Healing takes years. I think one of the biggest issues that I take with presenting that socially and culturally is that it primes us to believe that that's what it's going to be. So then we're more willing to accept a messy, looping, chaotic process. Oh, I'm just healing. Like, is that what healing looks like? I think healing actually is much more formulaic than we've been led to believe it is. And it doesn't have to be messy and it doesn't have to be looping. It doesn't have to take 10, 20, 30 years. I don't think it needs to take more than 6 months, frankly. I mean, that's the average time spent in break method is between 4 and 6 months. And typically at the end of 6 months, people are a radically different person.
Right.
And my favorite part about that is that it's not radically different in that you are becoming somebody else. It's that you're being restored to who you actually were meant to be when you first came into this world before the world started to pattern you into adaptation and reflex.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of patterns, like what we were talking about before, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to this either in their work as recruiters or when they're dealing with candidates that seem to end up in the same place, even though, going through their career, they're trying different things, they're trying to move up within an organization, and then they somehow land in the same spot that they were like 5 years before, and they're not getting anywhere. And I know the book addresses this, that there's like 5 different types of brain patterns. Is that right?
Yep. There are 5 primary types, and then there are subtypes within the 5.
Yeah. So how does that happen? Like the first step I would think is just knowing, okay, what brain pattern type am I? Is that correct? Like when you take
correct.
Your patients,
one of the
or your
things that's been really
it?
interesting, I've worked with one of the largest sales recruiting companies in the United States.
Yeah.
And when I did this, obviously I got to look at a lot of brain pattern types within this organization. And we had everyone from kind of the high ticket closers to the managers of those teams to the executives of those teams. So I got to see a pretty broad swath of the organization. There are certain brain pattern types that are predisposed towards certain types of jobs and certain levels of hierarchy. So one of the things that these candidates might be experiencing is that their brain pattern type is actually not well suited for like C-suite or even management level tasks. Right. An example of this could be, I had quite a few people who were the high ticket closers, right? High ticket closers are typically on the right side of the brain pattern spectrum, and I'll color this in a little bit more as we keep going. But imagine for now, there's a left and a right half, right? So it kind of split in half. There's a left side of the brain pattern spectrum and a right side. Most high ticket closers that are high performers that you actually want in your organization are going to be on that right side of the spectrum. The right side of the spectrum actually are not typically very good naturally at being executives or in operations because they're focused on the relational interactions and they can figure out what near-term dangling carrot I need to get to keep boosting my numbers, but they're not actually very good at situational awareness or this big picture thinking. I call it 5-circle thinking. So to be great at executive leadership or to manage a team that has, 50 to 100 people, or to even be an entrepreneur to run a company, you have to have such strong situational awareness with, of course, some relational awareness as well. But you have to be able to see the bigger picture, and you have to be able to think strategically into that fifth circle. I can't just be focused on what's right in front of me. I have to, in a snapshot instance, know how my decision here affects the second circle and the third and the fourth and the fifth without being told to do so. The people on the right do not have that skill. We can help you cultivate it, but it's a skill that is ironically not cultivated when you grow up in a home that is loving and supportive and nurturing. So ironically, the people that end up on the right side that struggle the most to get to that top level actually typically had great childhoods.
That's so interesting.
And it's all of the rest of us who were broken, abused, and traumatized that tend to be really good at that situational awareness, but we're missing relational cues that don't make us good at things like sales.
Interesting. That's so interesting. So it'd be really helpful for, like, how do you use this, or how did that sales organization use it day to day when they're hiring and recruiting and knowing, you know, where is this person going to evolve within the organization?
That was one of the things that they were trying to look at was they had a tendency to move people up from within the company, which I think is fairly standard with most companies. So the problem with that is, based on what I just shared, now you're trying to move people who actually don't have a brain pattern that helps them think like an executive. Now you're trying to fast track them into an executive position. Meanwhile, you also may have people who you've placed into sales who might have some months where they're crushing it and then other months when they're not. And that person actually shouldn't be fired from the organization. They should be moved into that other team position. So I think part of what we were really trying to do is figure out who needs to move where so that we have a player that is in the most valuable position. Because honestly, when you're interviewing somebody and you go through that process, there's a reason that you were drawn to them, but you may not have put them in the right position. If you think of your organization like a chessboard, you may have thought that they were a pawn, but they're really a knight. You might have thought that they were a knight, but they're really a bishop. And you have to know how to take that brain pattern position and understand how that's going to predispose how they see the world, how they see interactions, and more than that, how their decision-making unfolds over time. So with brain pattern mapping, we track 9 distinct markers. 2 on the top level are going to show us how that person fundamentally sees the world, and with the assumptions that we make, the conclusions that we draw, because once we've moved from that assumption to conclusion stage, all of our behavior choices get constrained down. So just like an aperture on a camera where it's going to kind of close that down, as soon as we've assumed something about our environment and it's turned into a conclusion, any behavior response that doesn't get us to that conclusion is now hidden from our perception. This is why the easiest example of this for people that are trying to put this into action, I typically use a physical example, so forgive me. So have you ever met somebody who, even when maybe I'm thinking of my sister, whenever I think of these things, because my sister was quick to anger growing up and would throw anything that was in her hand. Have you ever met somebody like that where they just they throw things?
Yeah.
So my mom was like this too. My mom has remember back in the day where you had the wireless cord phone that was this big. I've watched so many phones shatter in my kitchen. As soon as you're yelling, my gosh, phone throws. I'm like, well, what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
So there are people like that when they're emotionally activated, whatever they are holding or is around them, they have that physical desire to expel energy. I'm thankfully for you not one of these people.
Okay, good.
So let's say
I'm not going to get anything.
But let's say in this scenario, I was that type of person.
Yeah.
And let's say that you said something that I found totally offensive.
Yeah.
If I hadn't done the work, I might grab this book and throw it at you, right? I mean, that'd be a horrifying thing to do. No one would ever do such a thing. But technically, if you were to take all of the decisions that I have available to me at all times, that is technically an option that I have. I could throw this book at you to defend myself or defend my honor.
Right.
Thankfully, again, I'm not that type of person. But that choice is available, but my brain hides that choice because it has nothing to do with the formula that I think in. I'm not an angry person. I'm not a reactive person. If you said something that, it would be really hard to offend me, but let's say in some strange universe you did.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, it would be so hard. If people that even still to offend me, I'm still oh yeah, sounds good. So let's say hypothetically that you did offend me. My choices would include ask you a question about it, try to understand your perspective, right? Because I'm not quick to be being reactive.
Yeah.
So in any moment that we have all these choices that our brain hides or shows us based on the assumptions and conclusions that we formulate. And this is why understanding your brain pattern is what ends up allowing us to accurately predict not just what you're going to do, but why you're going to do it.
Right.
And I think this is like the biggest question that I think in many spaces in both mental health or even like leadership development, recruiting, people aren't able to answer this question, but why? Brain pattern mapping actually tells us not just what you're going to do, but why you're going to do it.
Wow.
That's the coolest part.
Yeah. Now, I know a lot of candidates, they're used to doing assessments. They don't like them, but they will do them for us, especially if they're really interested in a position that we have open. How do you think this is received by candidates that it could be so helpful for them for so many reasons, but I can imagine, especially my company, the Finders, we place tech people. Sometimes they're more private, and they're like, what? Like, they might be really afraid to be seen and to show some of those tendencies, like throwing things when you're mad. Like, you probably wouldn't want your employer to know that you might be, that could happen. Not that it would. We're just, exaggerating a little bit. But have you, give us some ideas, like how can we use this tool, and how do we get people to be okay with it and be comfortable with it?
So let's back up a little bit. Many of the tools and assessments that are utilized right now, they're asking you questions that allow you to kind of self-score or self-assess. This is problematic for a variety of reasons, because there are entire websites dedicated to teach you how to essentially skew your strengths finder, personality test. So anytime we're asking you to kind of self-score or give, again, a qualitative response, like how would you handle this situation? We're already now having so many layers of self-deception involved that I don't believe that information is going to be all that beneficial. So what our program does is it uses historical data. So we're never getting into the weeds of like, hey, in this situation, how would you handle it? That's, I think, the most beneficial thing about brain pattern mapping, not just from the actual company side, but from the candidate side. All of your information is completely private. So your employer will never see anything that you put in here. They will never see any of that. They literally just see these 9 markers that help the company see, does this person fit into this specific avatar that we made for this part of your business? And if not, how many of these 9 markers are slightly off, and are these things that we can actually step in and help the client work with? So I think from that standpoint, the information's not qualitative. It's not like, how do you handle things? How do you feel? This is more, it's a more fundamental how you're seeing the world and how your behavior unfolds over time. And for what it's worth, there are plenty of positions, even in tech, you actually, like that person that might throw something, if they're working alone in a silo doing tech, that actually could be a great personality type for that. Right. So we know exactly what to look for. And in certain areas where you are working more in a silo, or you do have to be able to make quick decisions, look at that a different way. That quick decision and impulsivity actually could make you thrive in a job, but really not do well in relationships. So the same person that could throw something in a relationship could actually thrive if they're coding something. So we're not giving information about what they're like as a person. We're educating both the employer and the candidate how these pattern types actually map over to this specific role. So from the candidate's perspective, doing it for yourself rather than having an employer be like, hey, do this, you're able to come to the table and say, here, I already understand why these jobs that I keep going for, I'm either not successful or I keep getting laid off. So it'll give you real insight into, is this iteration of the job you're going for actually the right fit for you? Or can we look at what the data says and show you, okay, you're in the right general area, but what if we pivot to something over here instead of over here? Because I think it's frustrating for people to go after something that maybe they went to school for, or like all of the 3-letter acronyms after their name say, but somehow they're not thriving in that job. Brain pattern mapping will actually help you understand why 2 + 2 is continually not equaling 4. So it'll kind of alleviate that constant frustration so that you can figure out where you can slightly pivot. Because in a lot of cases, and I'm sure you deal with this all the time, it's not a 180-degree turn. It's this slight pivot. Yes, tech, but instead of this part of tech, this part of tech.
Right.
And I think for a candidate, it opens up such a deeper understanding of why potentially doors aren't opening or why you are not happy or reporting a high quality of life in your job. Because I do think that everyone can find a job that doesn't feel like a job. It feels like more aligned with your purpose. And this will help you understand how to really align those two in a way that boosts your quality of life, not just your alignment at the job itself.
Right. So that's a really good point. So maybe even doing the brain mapping before, like do it for
bingo.
you personally, especially now there's so many people that are out of jobs. They've been laid off the past couple of years has been so tough. So doing that if you're, just personally so that you know what job to go for, I think would be
and to
really
understand,
helpful.
are you more that kind of executive, big picture vision thinking person, or are you the more relational, near-term decision-making person? Because they're two very different types. And another example would be there's a very specific subset on the left side of the spectrum where the majority of entrepreneurs are. If you have that brain pattern type, honestly, you could be a fabulous employee, but you're going to hate every second of your life. And is that really worth it to you? Right. So somebody there, it's like we can help them understand like, hey, you thrive at operations because you already are thinking like an entrepreneur. What if we put a timeline on this current job where you're going to stick it out for another year and a half while you're envisioning what business you want to build? Because sometimes people need that straddle of the two worlds to make their current job feel better. Like they need to envision the next iteration so that they can be more present in their job currently if they're not being fulfilled. So there are just these placements on the brain pattern spectrum that we can also give you valuable insights into why you feel frustrated. There's this one position on the right side, I call it the cowboy position. It's almost all the way to the right. And interestingly enough, if you go like 2 clicks more to the right, we end up with a fairly chaotic presenting pattern that often can end up in prison struggling with severe addiction. But it's like with just a few clicks to the left, these people are a little bit more wild. I call it the cowboy position because they're just kind of this like wild, kind of reckless cowboy. Doesn't appear front facing like they care what other people think, but they also have a strong sense of duty and loyalty. That is this kind of emerging brain pattern that I've seen pop up in a lot of the entrepreneurial spaces that I've been in, or even like with podcast hosts. A lot of podcast hosts I've met have this one. And that's kind of a unique one because you have this flexibility where you could do kind of the one-on-one, and then you also do think a little bit bigger picture. So there are these interesting placements where you do have a blend of both. And then obviously you've got more doors open for you and what recruiting possibilities would work for you. So either way, we could give you a lot of valuable insights into how you see the world, what sort of job is ultimately aligned for you. And if there's something you really want to do and your brain pattern is not predisposed toward that, we can show you exactly what you would need to work on to make yourself a more viable candidate.
How much can you really work on something? Because I would think that some of these things are just innate personality traits, or can you actually move from where you currently are to a different place on that spectrum?
Your personality is a byproduct of our brain pattern. So I like to think of it in a top-down funnel. So how we see the world is going to dictate how we're forming definitions, assumptions, and conclusions. Then once those are formed, now we start to experience emotion, right? The chemical domino effect starts to happen, and now we're actually behaving that can be visibly observed in the outside world. Our personality is a byproduct of both our emotional response and our behaviors, right? The thought process itself is not so much something that people pick up on with personality. When you change the brain pattern and you actually rewire the perception of reality, what also changes? Personality. In my experience, this takes about 20 to 24 weeks for people to hold it sustainably, and that's what we do in Break Method. I have seen people come into the program that have started out being some of my least favorite humans in the world, and many of them now work for me. So I've seen people radically 180 out of being angry, reactive, victim-centric, much more defensive or hypercritical, and completely turn the corner to being lovely, emotionally regulated, and emotionally mature people. So I do really think we've been pitched this idea that our personality is fixed. And I think even more than that, we've been pitched this idea that we should just radically own our authentic personality, or to blame our genetics or our family line. When the reality is we can address it on the level of perception, and then in turn have that whole funnel actually work on our behalf instead of against us. Because quite often we want things that are not in line with the behaviors that we're acting out. Right? And that's why we end up in pain. How did I get here? I thought I was doing it so differently, but we keep accidentally doing the same thing. When you work at the level of neurocognition, now you're actively changing the behavior, not by white knuckling it, not by telling the person, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. That's a process that you're so far down the line that that's not really going to work. It's like telling a heroin addict, don't use heroin, and having that be your only strategy. It's not effective. You have to understand what processes happen at that level of cognition that eventually lead them to go buy heroin, even though at one phase they know don't buy heroin. What decision-making processes unfold over time that eventually get them to move from, I want to stay sober, to injecting heroin. Really, you take a situation like that and you transfer it into a habit, preparing for an interview. It's the same thing. A lot of times we want to thrive at something, and then we don't actually take the steps to make sure that we secure our success on the other side. So break method works at that level of neurocognition to make sure that we're actively engaging in our perception and our definitions in a way that gets us to that end goal. One way to look at this is if you just look out at the whole world around you, really everything's a bunch of pixels. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but if you think about like how a picture sometimes gets pixelated, a bunch of these tiny little things all make up a picture. The way we're perceiving reality, unfortunately, I know this is hard for some people to really grasp, but it's far less concrete and dense than we think it is. We're perceiving something and our brain is taking the pixels and it's organizing them into pictures, right? Like plant, podcast host, light. Our brain is looking at the pixels and then it's forming a definition. As soon as we've formed that definition, we've now also brought with it assumptions and conclusions. This is why someone can look at someone's facial expression and be like, oh, they're mad at me. And someone else is like, what are you talking about? They were so happy. What? Yeah. Well, how do we see that so differently? Because our brain is kind of taking these pixels and it's deciding these things look like they belong together. And through priming, our brain's kind of filling in the gaps and then we're acting as if. If you can address the way the brain is organizing and defining these pixels, and then in turn generating language, excuses, justifications, rationalizations, then you can change behavior without having to try to change it, right? Because as soon as I'm telling you, don't do it this way, do it this way, then you have to try. And that's honestly not very effective.
I love that. So yeah, the whole idea of like rewiring, right? And I read that in the book. What is the process? Because I know you said like in therapy, it could be like years. Someone could be trying to just, feel better about themselves or the way that they're thinking about themselves. And then with your method and going through this, it can be a lot shorter of a process. Just give me like the high level overview. Like how does that happen in such a short amount of time? Like what does it actually look like to go from, feeling negative, feeling like nothing's working out to changing some of the perceptions that they have to feeling a different way and being able to get a different outcome?
Let's look at therapy to create a point of contrast. Yeah. In therapy, you are often being asked narrative questions and you're also often not being given direct answers. Yeah. Sometimes questions are met with more questions. And the client in many cases gets to guide the trajectory of therapy. If you don't want to talk about something or you're feeling really emotional, it's like, oh, it's okay. We'll talk about that next time. Where I really don't want to talk about that. As soon as the client can let their preference dictate the trajectory of the healing, it won't work. Because your brain pattern actually doesn't want to change. It wants to stay fixed because it believes it's protecting you. Your brain defines safety only as known cause and effect. And if we make those rules between 3 and 5, whatever we experienced with high repetition between 3 and 5 ultimately is what dictates what we perceive as safe. So anything outside of that, even if it's inherently good, like success, accolades, love, connection, our brain, if it doesn't know those things, it will decide that they are unsafe because they're unfamiliar. So it will do whatever it can to convince us to stay inside of this sort of controlled circle. Now, in break method, instead of being asked these narrative-driven questions, we are extracting data. And to extract data, often the client can't know what we're looking for or why we're looking for it. So in one of my first slides where we're getting a client to understand what's happening, have you ever seen the original Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise? Yeah. Okay, so you know where he's like dropping into Langley from like that really high thing on the wire, and there's all the motion sensors and the temperature sensor, and then it kind of, there's like one bead of sweat. Do you remember that's like about to drip, and then he grabs it and they pull him back up. I always tell people we've got to drop into your psyche and your subconscious, just like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. Because as soon as you know what I'm asking and why I'm asking it, then your defense mechanism can kick in. Then you can actually try to circumvent or distract me away from what I'm looking for. So break method is built at its foundation to prevent self-deception. So you don't know what we're looking for and how we're going to use it, but we've also extracted it all out and put it out onto a working table, right? So now as you're moving through the process, you're starting to see like all these different pieces that you can't run from, and you couldn't prevent them as they were being extracted because you didn't know how to manipulate it. But now you're starting to see all these pieces come together. Going back to that idea of therapy, oftentimes people in therapy, they decide why they're broken, right? They have their story. I'm like this because I have daddy issues. I'm like this because I was adopted, right? Like fill in the blank. That's like saying, you know, if I'm like this because I was adopted is like giving me a picture, like a very fixed picture of like the moment that I was adopted. Now break all that apart and now put that into jigsaw puzzle pieces. Basically, the person's they've created their picture and now they're just trying to reassemble the pieces that they already created. But it's all very self-generated and it's all through that lens of pattern. In break method, we go into it saying, hey, most of the things that you have believed to be true about why you are this way are likely not true. For 11 years, we've proven it time and time again that they function more like red herrings. So the more convinced you are of something, the less likely it is to be the actual cause. So we go into it saying, we don't know. It's our job to figure this out like scientists instead of decide this is why I think and then try to seek to prove ourselves right. We try to prove ourselves wrong. And literally the reason it's called break method is once we have that hypothesis, we try to break it in so many ways that by the end, once it's held strong and we've come to that conclusion state, we are positive that what we're going to do is going to work. So in break method, you're extracting information and data and you're realizing, okay, these all go on the left side, these all go on the right side. And you're grabbing all these puzzle pieces, but you don't know what the picture looks like yet. So now when it's like, okay, now we're putting all these together, people have reported so many times, when I put these together, I didn't realize what I was doing. And then when it all came together, I realized like, holy bleep, like this is it. And there's so many therapists that I've had in my work because I also train therapists that even like partway through, they're telling me I've been doing this for X amount of years. I've done so much therapy on my own. I've never realized that it was this. And this makes so much sense because it's like a keystone or a codex. It's like once you really figure out what that thing is, everything else that you've ever experienced now orbits around it and makes everything make sense. And then if you get to that root, and you address the way that root is subtly distorting your perception, everything changes so quickly. So that's kind of phase one, is that data extraction. That part, as you can imagine, it can be painful for people. They don't necessarily like that part, but I will say it's brief and intense and it always has productive intent behind it. So it's never just like wallowing. It's never like looking for problems and trying to create problems. It's very tactical. So typically if something's gonna hurt, it hurts less because you know where you're going and where you're going next. And it's always like pull the piece out, use it. Pull the piece out, use it. It's never just like bring things up to the surface and then cry about it. Never. Then you move into the second phase of the work, which is looking, once we have that pattern hypothesis, then we're looking at every area of your life, your relationships, your sex life, sexual fantasy, parenting, career, your spiritual life, because we need to figure out how this pattern has kind of like crept its way under the surface and altered the way you engage with every aspect of your life. Even if we leave, I know it sounds silly, but I've seen people who address everything, but they let their like sleep and dream life go. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, Bizzie, I was doing so good. Now I'm getting attacked in my dreams. And I'm like, listen, this thing really wants to survive. So then it's kind of like doing all these processes to make sure that we're getting all of the remnants in all of the areas of your life. Then we're really focused on the rewire period. The rewire period is once we've proven that the hypothesis is now a conclusion, we understand and have mapped every single place that this distorts reality, what the language sounds like. Then we start to dismantle the systems of language that are operating at that level of perception. And this is done subtly throughout the program. People don't realize that's what's happening, which typically by the time we really kick into full gear, people are like, oh, I see how you Jedi mind tricked me there. Because like this is now so easy because you were giving them the breadcrumbs the whole time. But the key, I think, in break is I describe break method like agreeing to be a rat in a maze. You are the experiment, right? And we are kind of changing out what's triggering you so that you can understand what happens when we kind of toggle this on and this off so that you're collecting all of the data. By the time you get to the end, you realize if I was able to guide any part of that, I would have completely self-sabotaged, I would have left, I would have lied, something would have happened. But by the end, the structure ultimately is what gets everyone to the other side having this massive breakthrough. It's so rare. I've had 15,000 clients. I think I can think of a handful of people that didn't completely radically change. And there's usually some reason for that, right? Like a spouse is kind of messing with you the whole time because they're afraid of what the work is going to mean on the other end, etc. But 99% of the time, it's like such a radical transformation. And by the end, when you're given, we call it your rewiring blueprint, this is when we expect you to actively be doing all these things differently. By that point, a lot of people are like, plot twist, like I'm doing these things. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point. We get you so distracted thinking about this point where now I'm going to do things differently that oftentimes people will look at you and they're like, I'm literally doing these things naturally. How is that even possible? Then it's because of addressing it at that top level.
That's amazing.
So yes, long-winded answer, your personality can change because it's a byproduct of your perception. And I think for everybody, we should learn how to be more dynamic. Many people get really fixed and locked in their way of communicating or their way of seeing things. And as you know, especially if you're going to go into managing high-level teams, you need to be able to understand many different types of people. You need to be able to adapt your speech to different groups of people at different times. And if you're just this one fixed way, your team won't like you or you won't be successful in managing them. And those are all skills that can be learned. There's skills that are created by what happens to you in childhood, but they're also skills that you can learn through something like break method.
Right. Just being self-aware in different environments. And I'm sure that they learn that throughout your process.
Absolutely.
So, what should everyone know about the book since they can now officially get it today?
Well, I'm so excited for you. You're in for a wild ride. So the first quarter of the book helps you lay a solid foundation for what self-deception is, some of my personal journey of how I even created brain pattern mapping and how I see the world. I think if you look at algorithms in general, and there's obviously a hot topic, who creates it to some extent builds a level of bias into it, right? Which I think a lot of people reach, even if you're looking at it like politically in ChatGPT, there tends to be a leaning.
Yeah.
I think it's important for you to understand how I see the world and who I am, because I think it will shed a lot of light into how this information even came to me in the first place, because it is fairly disruptive and antagonistic to the mental health paradigm today. So that's in the beginning of the book. Then there's a section where it becomes actually very geared toward your specific pattern. So you're going to want to do brain pattern mapping, because then you're going to know exactly what your pattern is, and then you get to read the rest of the book focused on your pattern. I want to encourage you, read the whole thing and encourage your friends and family and loved ones to do brain pattern mapping, because then you'll be able to literally take a peek into their subconscious and their underlying motivations. So you're going to actually build empathy and collaboration with people around you, because you're going to realize like, oh, I'm so frustrated that my husband does X, Y, Z. Once you find out his pattern and you go read those chapters, you're going to be like, oh my God, I get my husband now. It's been 20 years and I finally understand like why he does that annoying thing that drives me nuts.
Right.
So when we can understand someone's why, we often stop being so damn mad about it, and we can actually learn to collaborate. So focus in on the parts that are about you, but figure out everybody else around you and read their sections too, because it will allow you to connect with them on such a deeper level and stop taking things personally, stop being so reactive, because you'll really understand what drives a person.
Right.
That person that might come off as micromanaging or controlling, there's a way to work around that. And not take it as they don't trust me, or there's so much nuance to this, but look at it also from the people around you, and don't be so quick to just skip the other chapters, because this is literally, it's like the cheat code to life, you guys. If you know this stuff, you can basically hack connection with any person around you. And for recruiting, This is essential stuff to know.
That's our job.
That's your job. And you'll be able to start looking at this and realizing, oh, I'm already picking up these things. And then if you run them through brain pattern mapping, you'll be like, oh, I was right about that.
Now, can you have a tendency to be two? And I think I know the answer. I mean, would you say there's only one brain type mapping that
per person?
Yeah.
Yeah. You end up
I read it.
You end up in a very fixed position. Yeah. So those 9 markers are what actively place you on a position. And it is a constitutional pattern, meaning it doesn't actually change. We're very hardwired beings.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is that even as we're able to rewire, we find that people are able to oppose their pattern, and they're able to see kind of a more broad swath of choices that they have available to them. And they do become much more dynamic. Many of the behaviors that were previously seen as, let's say, reactive, angry, or anxious now start to present more regulated and calm and present. I always try to encourage people, no matter how much work you've done, no matter how much you've changed, when life throws you a curveball, what happens? Your brain tries to default you right back there. It's like your default setting. Yeah. So for me, I've come a long, long way from the way my brain was patterned. But if I have to travel a ton or I get sick or like my husband starts a fight with me while I'm sick, you always have to watch for those perfect storm events, because that's when all of a sudden I'll start to notice an uptick in my inner monologue where I'm like, we are not doing this today. We are not going backwards. Because that brain pattern does want to pop back in and be like, hey, you rang. I did not ring. Go away.
I was going to ask you that, Bizzie, because I find I've done a lot of like personal development over the years, and I feel like I have changed as a person in my relationships and everything, but there's certain triggers or there's certain times where I feel like it's almost like, no, I don't want to go backwards in my thinking or my, just the way that I view things or my perception. So do you have to constantly, once you feel like, all right, I'm like working on rewiring, do you find like you have to, I don't know, practice and I don't know if that's part of the process, but how can you keep it from like going backwards, like your old self, like coming back?
Save those perfect storm events that I don't think happen all that often. Yeah. I don't think you have to work at it very hard. I think once you've gotten through, we consider the rewire period to be 30 days of a sprint. Once you get to the end of that, you are kind of fundamentally changed, but it's only when those kind of big perfect storm events tend to pop up that you just have to really lean on your manual, right? We give you that whole blueprint, which has like, in the case of an emergency, X, Y, and Z to get out of it. So everything we're already helping you not fall in the hole if that happens, and you know what the signs are of falling in the hole. So the likelihood that someone's going to completely go backward is extremely rare, because most people catch it right away. Yeah. So I don't think it's about like being on guard and practicing. I think in general, we get people to a place where they can be really present and non-reactive, which is kind of the opposite of being on guard and like thinking about practice. So it's really more, we look at that kind of 4-month timeline, that whole last 30 days, that's where we're focused on leaning on synaptic plasticity to really change the pattern at that level more of behavior, because we've already worked on the brain pattern the whole time. And then that last month is like, now we have to do these things differently, and we've got to collect data and field work as we're doing the things differently, because that's where their lives start to change externally so much, because often in the process, like, you're changing and your perception has changed so much. But sometimes the people around us are slower to catch up. Yeah. Because they get addicted to the old version of us. So they keep trying to poke us and see if they can get us to go backwards. And by the time we've gotten to the end and we haven't gone backwards, typically they've leveled up and changed so much too, that then they come to us. Even the most resistant spouse, that's like, what is this quackery you're participating in? By the time that person changes, typically I have their spouse within a few weeks. It's like, okay, if you could change my wife or my husband, then let's go.
Right. And I would think if you're reacting differently, then your spouse is going to react differently to that too.
Absolutely.
Right. So such good stuff. Where can they find the book? And I'll put everything in the show notes too.
You can find it on any major retailer, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, all the things. But let's focus on Amazon for now, y'all. It's available on hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. And the audiobook isn't coming out till July or August, but I would encourage you to grab a physical copy. I know that people are audiobook people, but I just want to show you something, okay?
It's
Okay.
yes.
This is not the audiobook that you want.
Right.
You can do it as a companion, but when you're actually going into the parts of the book that are focused on your pattern, you want to have something that you can highlight, that you can hold tactilely, take notes. You don't just want this to be an audiobook experience. So my suggestion, get the book, and then down the road, if you want to get the audiobook so you can be listening to it in the car and reinforcing that, that's great. But I think you want to take notes and highlight this.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so old school. So I get my highlighter out. I like put the pages with, pages that I want to go back to. So yeah, it's an amazing book. And I'm so appreciative that you came on the show. Where can our listeners find you if they want more information on brain mapping or just want more information on you?
Easiest way to get in touch with me personally is on Instagram. I do try to answer all my DMs. If you want to do brain pattern mapping, you can go to breakmethod.com. There are a variety of links that can take you to brain pattern mapping. That's typically the first step. If you are somebody who's more of a candidate looking for a job, obviously brain pattern mapping is a great place to start. If you are a company that's looking to integrate this into your recruiting pipeline or just wanting to take a look at what's happening in your organization, I would definitely just reach out to our customer service, or you can reach out to me on Instagram. We typically, just as a kind of a quick overview process, the process for brain pattern mapping in an organization is a little bit different because we actually custom brand a brain pattern mapping portal for the company itself.
Excellent.
And we work with all of the decision makers in the company to look at who they all perceive or have nominated to be their top 3 performing employees. So we run their top 3 through it first so that we can create a company avatar and get to know their company culture. And then we use that avatar to measure everybody else in the organization and help figure out where problems are coming from and how to solve the problems. So it's a much more in-depth process, but you can reach out to me on Instagram or on our website, breakmethod.com, and we can help with that.
And I'll put everything in the show notes so everyone will have it. And thank you again for coming on the show, Bizzie. And for everyone else, our listeners, we will see you next week on All Things Recruiting.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me today. I would love to hear what resonated with you or suggestions for a future show. Connect with me on LinkedIn and be sure to sign up for our monthly newsletter. All the links are in the show notes. And if you or someone you know is an amazing recruiter and is looking to join my brokerage recruiting model for more time, freedom, and money, let's chat.